Now, streaming live on Fox21News.com. Your voice, your future. A special town hall from the Fox 21 News studios. The Great Pot Debate.
Good evening, I'm Joe Cole with Fox 21 News. Welcome to tonight's town hall, Your Voice, Your Future, on the topic of recreational marijuana in southern Colorado. The goal of tonight's town hall is to inform and empower you, the viewer. Tonight, you will have the opportunity to participate and ask questions. You can do so through Twitter by simply using the hashtag #YourVoiceYourFuture, or you can log on to our Facebook page and ask your questions there. Now, the sale of recreational marijuana has only been legal in Colorado since January, and since its legalization, there has been a big debate on whether it is helping or hurting the citizens of Colorado. And even with a yes vote, each municipality had to determine whether they would allow recreational marijuana to be sold, and some have said no, which is still generating plenty of conversation today. Here's Fox 21's Allison Mastrangelo with more.
Recreational marijuana is relatively new to Colorado, and since its legalization, it has been quite the hot topic of discussion.
The marijuana industry wants you to believe that this tax money coming in will be a good thing for our state, and I think that the social consequences of it are going to cost us in the long run a lot more.
Kilroy also says that since the legalization of recreational marijuana, they've seen higher ER visits among kids and an increase in school suspensions.
It's risen 100 to 200%. That legalizing something makes it okay. So the message that we're sending to my children is that this is okay, and it's not really a big deal.
Kilroy says she's worried about the potency and the overall health of the kids.
Then the average was about 3% of the THC. We're talking 12 to 20% now. This does have effect on growing brains. So my children getting a hold of this as they're in the middle of high school, moving on to adulthood, could change their lives forever.
However, the recreational marijuana supporters agree that protecting the children is important, but says marijuana is not new and has been around for decades.
And certainly, I think we're all in agreement that we don't want kids using marijuana, that we don't want to see the abuse and misuse of marijuana. We just had a recent sting operation that was conducted by the regulators, the Marijuana Enforcement Division, went into over 20 businesses here in Colorado and found that there were 0 violations of selling to an underage minor. So we have a better track record right now with marijuana sales than we do alcohol sales.
Inslaw says now that it's legal, everyone can have a more open conversation about it.
When we have legalization, then we can have an honest dialogue about what is this plant, what are its effects, what's its potency, what's its duration, and compare that to other legal substances like alcohol, which has been successfully regulated ever since we ended prohibition there as well.
In Colorado Springs, Allison Mastrangelo, Fox 21 News.
We have invited 4 panelists, 2 for and 2 against recreational pot, and we have filled our studio with audience members set to ask questions. Representing the side in favor of recreational pot is Brian Vicente and Mark Slaw. Brian is a partner and founding member of Vicente Sederberg. He served as the co-director of the Amendment 64 campaign and was one of the primary authors of the historic measure. Also in favor is Mark Slaw. Now, Mark is the Southern Colorado Regional Coordinator at Campaign to Regulate Marijuana Like Alcohol. He is also the owner of I Comply, an organization that helps marijuana businesses comply with the law. On the other side of tonight's panel, representing those against recreational pot, are Dr. Kin Finn and Kari Kilroy. Dr. Finn sat on Governor John Hickenlooper's task force on Amendment 64 regulation, and Dr. Finn is a pain management specialist here in Colorado Springs. And finally, we have Kari Kilroy. Kari is the president of the El Paso County Board of Health. She has over 17 years of nonprofit and public sector experience in both healthcare and municipal government and is currently employed by Memorial Hospital UC Health. And now we turn things over to Behind the Headlines host and our moderator for the evening, Mark Hyman. Mark?
Thanks, Joe. Nearly half the states have approved marijuana use for medical use or have decriminalized it for personal recreational use. Washington State and Colorado have completely legalized it. Right now, the eyes of the nation are on Colorado as the remaining states deliberate what they will do. Good evening. I'm Mark Hyman, host of Behind the Headlines and tonight's moderator. You've heard the topic. It's all about recreational marijuana, and you were just introduced to our panel. Now we have here in the audience, or rather in the studio, a live audience anxious to get started with a lot of tough questions they're going to put to our panel of experts. But you at home can also be a part of this important discussion. News 21 anchor Lauren Ferrara, is manning our social media desk. She'll explain how you can join the discussion. Lauren?
That's right. This is all about you guys. We really want you to take part and post your questions, your comments, the pros and cons. We want to hear it all. You can do that on Twitter by using the hashtag #YourVoiceYourFuture, or just go to our Facebook page. You go to Facebook, search Fox 21 News, and you can post it right there. There's a question about this town hall, and I will try to get to as many comments as I possibly can. Back to you, Mark.
Thanks, Lauren. Now, this is a town hall. It's all about asking questions to our community leaders, in this case, our panel of experts. But we're going to start the evening off with the first question, not to the panel, but to our live audience here. And I'd like you to respond to my question with the sound of applause. Your two choices and answers are yes and no. Please respond to this statement. Recreational marijuana should be legal for sale in Colorado Springs. Those who believe yes, please applaud. Those who believe no, please applaud. It's about 50-50 in the audience. I'm going to put the same question to our panel, and for some reason, I think it's still going to be 50-50. But if you believe in the legalization of the sale of recreational marijuana in Colorado Springs, please raise your hand. And those opposed? All right, so it's 50-50 here all the way around. Let's start off with our first question of the evening. Please step on over here. Please tell us who you are, where do you live, and what is your question?
My name is Joe McGuire, and I'm from Colorado Springs, Colorado. And my question is, with alcohol regulation, the social costs are $10 lost for every dollar that's made. Since that's our model, how will marijuana do any better or be any different?
Mark, how would that help the economy?
Yeah, it's a very good question, I think, based in some mathematical logic. Specifically, you mentioned $1 to $10. I have something here from federal government, Center for Disease Control, that says we're spending about $223.5 billion in social costs around alcohol. So certainly we know it's a concern. I think they're talking about $1.90 here for every drink. So if your drink is $20, perhaps the math is correct. But really, what we're looking at is tax revenues generally offset social costs. And the way that we're looking at it with marijuana is very comparable to alcohol. In alcohol in Colorado, we have over 110 breweries. We tend to celebrate that about our state. And we bring in about $36 million a year. Governor Hickenlooper this year is expecting a little over $80 million. So when we start talking about the comparative effects, relative safety of tolerance, of withdrawals, of addictiveness, and of potency of marijuana compared to alcohol, I think we're going to find that the social costs are less, one, and two, that we're getting more tax benefits anyway to offset those social costs.
Ken, do the numbers make sense to you, or is revenue even important on this issue?
Revenue, of course, is important. But as it relates to, I mean, you can find anything you want on the internet, basically, but I think generally speaking, it is clear that the societal costs associated with tobacco use far outweigh the revenue with tobacco use, and the same with alcohol. I mean, I don't think we would have Mothers Against Drunk Driving or DUI stops on the highway or the Betty Ford Center. So I think that the societal costs may far outweigh the tax revenue.
Now, we're only 10 minutes in this discussion, and we've only had one question, but a lot of folks have been weighing into this issue for the last 2 weeks. Before we check with social media, I want to get one more question from our audience. Please tell us who you are, where do you live, and what is your question?
Dan May, I live here in Colorado Springs. You guys had mentioned a little bit in the beginning about kids, and I am wondering about our children. Do we have long-term studies on how this may affect children? I've seen on Fox 21 and other news channels families moving here in order to give their children marijuana. Are there legitimate reasons why some children should have it for medical reasons? And then finally, kind of a three-parter, sorry, which would be who should make the decision whether a particular child should be using marijuana?
Kari?
Well, I think Mr. May is talking about medical marijuana, if I'm correct.
Yes.
Okay.
Well, although I guess if a parent chooses, they could buy retail and give it to their child also.
That would be illegal,
but,
though.
Yeah.
But you would think, yes, it should be done with a prescription. And is it legitimate? I mean, are there legitimate reasons? Are there health issues involved with that? Do we know the long-term effects?
Yes and no. I think there have been studies done that show us ill effects of marijuana on children. But if you're talking about medical marijuana, I think that the people that would be making those decisions would be physicians, not stores or the marijuana industry. And I'm not sure I got all parts of your question, but I think there are probably some very legitimate medical reasons for children and adults to be using marijuana. But I think that's a separate issue from legalizing it on a retail scale and selling it at your corner store.
Brian?
Yeah, and I just wanted to be very clear at the beginning, you know, what Colorado voters overwhelmingly endorsed, including here in El Paso and Colorado Springs, is legal marijuana for adults 21 and over, right? And we became the first state, along with Washington, to pass those laws. So, you know, absolutely it's important to think about the ramifications for teens. It's important to think about the ramifications for medical marijuana patients, I suppose, of all ages. But, you know, what is on our books is a system like alcohol, where adults 21 and over can access this and buy it in a taxed and regulated fashion. So I just kind of wanted to be clear on that. This is when the voters passed this, they didn't create this laissez-faire, everyone can access this. In fact, it's only people 21 and over.
Well, we've already had some good questions from our live audience and some great discussion and answers from our panelists. But our viewers at home have been part of this debate, discussion for 2 weeks now. So let's check in with our social media desk. Lauren, what do you have for us?
That's right, Mark. We've got some really good questions, really good comments. Jeff Pyle says, what's to debate? Crime is down, revenues are up. Only a liberal would want to debate this as a bad thing. That one got a like. Lance Bean says, proud to be a Coloradan. Watch the rest of the U.S. follow. And overwhelmingly, people on our Facebook page have been pro the sale of recreational pot. A couple of people against it, of course. Mary says there's a long way to go with administering the new system. How can we keep it out of the hands of children if adults are so cavalier about the legality of this drug? If it's left laying around simply because it's legal, what's to keep children from using it too? So a lot of people are concerned about this getting in the hands of kids. So we might want to have the panel talk about that. Mark?
Well, let's go back to Mark, because I know in the opening video segment you talked about some sting operations were conducted, and that so far there haven't been any known violations of selling marijuana to underage children or underage minors and so forth. But should there be legitimate concerns about the availability in a home? And does this have any impact on whether or not it should be available for sale here in Colorado Springs?
Yeah, I think the commenter's question really used the words laissez-faire approach to marijuana. And it's actually, when you compare it to alcohol, quite different. So we're talking about alcohol being a more dangerous substance, one that kids generally start using in their late adolescence or towards that age. In other countries at the age of 18. We're constantly bombarded with alcohol advertising. I got to tell you, in marijuana, it's not that way. We have strict regulations that say we can't advertise to kids in an audience that is greater than 30% of minors under the age of 21. In fact, there's strict advertising on billboards, on outdoor signage. We don't have the same First Amendment corporate rights of speech in the marijuana industry in Colorado as alcohol does, or even big tobacco, which has some advertising limitations as well. So I think the approach is not to say let's go backwards against what the voters want and to ban all marijuana access completely, because the reality is it's going to be bought and sold every day among adults. And this is intended for adults only, as Brian said, 21 and up only. That's the law. So it kind of boggles my mind why we can get this with alcohol. The same concept, the same principle. We have stricter regulations over here for marijuana, and we can't come to the same conclusions along what actually does prevent kids from using marijuana. And I think that's the conversation we need to be having up here. And that's a conversation many of these folks, including the governor's task force, tackled together to come up with the regulations around the legitimate industry. So when we start looking at limiting access to kids, it's not happening through the stores where you got to check 21 and up IDs on 24/7 cameras. It doesn't happen. Where the access is happening is among their peer group or from adults that panhandle it like they do with alcohol. And the way we stop that is by adults being responsible, one, and parents being responsible, and two, really having fact-based education for our kids. These days they can Google anything. They're going to know if you're lying to them or not. And it's really important that we're fact-based in our approach as to prevent kids from using marijuana in the first place.
Kari, wouldn't you agree that Mark's made some good points in terms of how this is regulated and perhaps the safeguards are stricter than when it comes to tobacco and alcohol use?
I think on the face of it, it sounds good, But when you look at reality, it doesn't really work that way. That's the whole problem. Kids obviously aren't going to, Maggie's Farm in Manitou and getting their pot. They get it from their social network. And the two key driving factors that contribute to drug use and abuse are social acceptability, legalizing it, and accessibility, legalizing it. So, and the other thing I'd like to point out, he says that they're not marketing to children. I don't know if you can see this on your camera or not, but these are pictures of products made of marijuana that I'm not sure if these things are really intended for adults 21 and over. We're talking about Pot Tarts, Captain Chronic.
Those don't even exist in Colorado, Kari. Those are California-based products.
So the point is that there is marketing going to children, just like Big Tobacco does. I don't know if you might remember Joe Camel cigarettes. They insisted that that was not for children, but it's a cartoon character. And so that's my point, is that it sounds good what Mark is saying and what the law is trying to say, but in reality, those of us in public health know that it absolutely doesn't work that way.
Brian, let me just follow up on just an exchange that both Mark and Kari had. And again, here at News 21, we're not taking sides in this discussion. However, yesterday I actually visited a dispensary in Denver, and I did see some edibles that had names like gummy bears, and they looked like gummy worms and so forth, and they had an appearance that might appeal to a child. So does Kari raise legitimate concern that perhaps they might be of interest to children or potentially marketed to children?
Yeah, I think she does. Colorado has really, gone out and said, we are, the war on drugs, marijuana prohibition has not worked. We're going to try something different. And what they've done, I think it's a bold and forward-thinking step where they've decided to regulate marijuana, put it behind the counter, tax it, etc. There are some bumps in the road, frankly. And one of the things that we as a state need to really figure out is how to effectively regulate edibles. I was one of the primary authors of Amendment 64, the law that legalized marijuana. I did not necessarily foresee the edible issue being, what it is today. 6 months into sales, I think it's fairly inappropriate what we're seeing from some of these edible marketers out there. So, having said that, the state has set up a task force to look at this. They're looking at limiting advertising, as Mark said. They're looking at limiting, what these products can even look like themselves, the actual products, not the advertising. They're looking at limiting potency. They're looking at demarking or stamping these products so we know that they're in fact infused with marijuana. And I think those are all smart steps that Coloradans need to really be thoughtful about as we move forward with this legislation.
And here at News 21, we think it's important our public knows that the state has taken some steps in terms of regulations with edibles, in terms of packaging and safety procedures, things like safety caps and so forth, correct?
That's correct. So it's mandated that all edibles that are sold need to be in opaque packaging, so you can't see what's in there, and then also need to be in childproof packaging as well. So there are steps being taken.
That takes effect on November 1st? Takes effect, rather, on November 1st?
That's actually already in effect for edibles,
okay.
Yeah, correct.
Great. Let's go back to the studio audience. Sir, please tell us who you are, where do you live, and what is your question?
Hi, my name is Josh. I'm from Sioux City, Iowa, actually. I've been living in the area for the last year and a half in the Colorado Springs and Pueblo area. Basically, I've been researching cannabis, marijuana for about 15, 20 years, and one of the most common arguments is what we're discussing right now is about the availability to children. Being a father myself, I can definitely appreciate that concern. However, I also know from my personal experience that pot's already easily available to almost anyone of any age right now, just as it was nearly 20 years ago, or almost 20 years ago when I first started using it as a safer alternative to alcohol. Now, considering street dealers don't check IDs and Colorado's audited dispensaries have already proven to do so, would you all not agree then that regulating sales of marijuana is actually essential to keeping this from our children?
Ken, what are your thoughts?
I would agree with you. I think it is essential to keep it out of the hands of children, but unfortunately that isn't happening. It hasn't been happening for many years, especially with the mass commercialization several years ago with the medical dispensaries that proliferated across the state. It is now the #1 admission diagnosis in the state of Colorado for adolescent substance treatment. And I'm going to read you a quote regarding some of the accessibility issues that came from the Cannabis, the Denver Post today. regarding the asthma inhaler called the Puffit. The problem, so public pot smoking is still illegal even in places where pot is now legal. Serious bummer, I know. The solution, the one and only solution, of course, is to be super sneaky when getting high in public. But mostly you just don't want to get caught by police because the fuzz can totally buzzkill your sweet high. It's in the Denver Post today. So, I mean, I think regarding the advertising, there are things in place to try to prevent advertising, but another advertisement from, I believe, the Denver Post in the winter was stop on your way up to the mountain for all your recreational needs. Show your ski pass and receive a $1 joint. So the advertising is prevalent. It's bad messaging to children, and I would agree that it is imperative to try to keep it out of the hands of children, but it isn't happening, and it's actually getting worse. The number of phone calls to poison control are on the rise, particularly in the kids that are under 5 years old, and the number of accidental ingestions in kids under 12 years old have gone up more than 600% in the past 4 years.
Mark, doesn't Ken raise some legitimate concerns?
Sure, and he makes it sound scary. I think 600% when you're talking about year end to year end, what is it, 14 kids out of tens of thousands of products sold every day? So, you know, we have to put this into context a little bit. I'm not disagreeing with you. I absolutely think that it's imperative kids don't get a hold of this. We're all in agreement on that in this panel, no matter who you are. And we've sat on the same working group with that in mind, with edible safety in mind, for not just keeping it out of the hands of kids, but also for consumers and labeling and packaging. So we have a robust set of regulations. I think at the core of this, though, we have to realize marijuana's been around. It's going to continue to be around. So what are we doing about it to safely and effectively control it as best we can? There's a lot of arguments. I mean, even the pictures you guys have, some of those aren't even real products. Captain Chronic is not a real product. It's a made-up thing online that you're pulling from. The other one you mentioned was the ski resorts. Well, you know, it's a free market. They are advertising to tourists coming here. In fact, we had a record ski season, $4.1 billion coming into Colorado, some of the lowest employment that we've had in a long time, and we're really shifting the economy in a positive direction around allowing this for adults only. And I think that's where we have to start, is by realizing that the majority of users out there aren't children. There's 14, okay, cases. What we're talking about is the majority of users being responsible adults in the first place. And until we get rid of the stigmatization and the judgment that somehow these people aren't being responsible, then we can't really come to a dialogue about sensible policies that can effectively control this, not only for adults, but also to protect our children.
Well, we're back to the studio audience, and after we get this gentleman's question, we're going to have to check in with Lauren again, because I know folks at home want to join this discussion. But, sir, please tell us who you are, where do you live, what is your question?
Joel Igner, Colorado Springs. My question is kind of simply this. We all care about children. We all care about making sure that, as parents, we have sovereignty over our children's experiences. With that being said, when we talk about things that continue to get into the hands of children that are perhaps inappropriate, do the panelists that do not support recreational marijuana within Colorado Springs, would you guys support a ban on recreational alcohol in Colorado Springs, being that the social costs are already quantifiable? They are significantly higher in terms of the numbers that we can document when they're related to vehicular homicides, sexual assaults, and you know, just rowdiness that we see in like downtown Colorado Springs. In order to perhaps be morally and intellectually consistent, I would hope that that would be your position. Is it?
You know, Kari, we're all drawing lines in the sand, and he suggests drawing another line.
Well,
doesn't he have a legitimate concern, and why shouldn't we look at the use and abuse and misuse of alcohol?
let me address something first, though. Everyone keeps throwing out the term, we all care about children, we all care about children, which, what else are you going to say? Well, but my point is that we're making decisions that aren't good for children. So I think that's become quite hollow. But in answer to the question about alcohol, yeah, I would fight that battle, but it was over long before my time. The battle that we're fighting right now is a new public health concern, which is the legalization of another drug in our society. And if we learn and look back at our history, we know what the consequences and the results will be. So I I appreciate what he's saying. He's saying philosophically and morally, if you're talking about the same argument, but that's over and done with. I don't think I'm going to take on alcohol at this point. What I am taking on is this new threat to our society, and that's my answer.
Mark?
I think there's a little bit of a lack of consistency if one, alcohol is objectively more dangerous. And two, you say things on Facebook like you want to overturn Amendment 64 itself, so why wouldn't you be in favor of banning alcohol if it's the same process of gathering signatures from the voters like Brian and I did to get Amendment 64 passed? Just wondering why you're at odds if you're...
Well, I guess my question is why do you care what battle I fight? This is the battle I'm choosing to fight, and I did gather signatures in Manitou Springs, and that's what we're doing. So if you would like to take on alcohol, you go right ahead.
No, not at all. I think it's safely regulated for
I'll
adults.
just answer the question directly. I do not believe alcohol should be illegal for adults 21 and over.
Neither do I.
I can shoot straight on that. And you know, as a father of two, I do really believe in protecting children from, and I think it's important that we consider that issue. What I would say is we have 80 years to look back on the failed policy of marijuana prohibition. It failed teens year in and year out. It put people in prison. It prevented folks from getting jobs who then get who had criminal records. It wasted massive amounts of taxpayer dollars. And now Colorado has said enough is enough. And we want to tax this product, we want to get it off the streets, we want to put it behind the counter where people are asking for IDs, and I think that is a better system than having the black market cartels run this.
Well, we're starting to get some fireworks here in the studio, and the producer tells me that we're actually getting fireworks on our Facebook and social media pages of Twitter. So let's check with our social media desk. Lauren, what's the latest?
That's right, Mark. We're getting a lot of people commenting about the money that it could bring into our town. Elizabeth, she says, I never used pot in my life until it became legal. I don't understand why I was so against it. The more research I do, the more open-minded I become. Sebastian says, why should we not experience the revenue for our town that others are? As a medical patient with no prejudice, I say let's use the potheads revenue for the potholes. We have quite a few of those in Colorado Springs. Now Denise says, I think the biggest question is why are we still debating this issue? Colorado voters already said yes to recreational pot. Colorado Springs really could use the revenue. Why is our city council dragging their feet? So I'll send it back to you, Mark.
Question.
Well, thanks, Lauren. So, well, Ken, why not just close the book on this chapter and move on? It was decided at the state legislature. Why not allow the Colorado Springs Council to make a decision on whether or not it should be done here?
Well, because with the democratic process, I understand what happened with the vote on Amendment 64. The beat of the drum is regulate it and make money. However, we are already starting to see some of the collateral damage associated with that because it is now so much easier for children to access marijuana. They are now being treated in substance abuse treatment centers more than ever. And the science is very clear. The younger you start using, the more problems you're going to have in the future. Psychosis, schizophrenia. We haven't done a good job with alcohol. We haven't done a good job with tobacco. We haven't done a good job with narcotics. What makes this so different that we're going to do such a good job, even though all those other substances are regulated?
Brian, doesn't Ken raise some legitimate concerns about the regulation and the control?
Well, certainly there are lessons we can take from how our country has regulated alcohol and tobacco, but I think it's safe to say that we believe that adults can make choices in our society. We believe that adults can purchase alcohol, and a wide majority of Colorado voters said, you know what, adults can purchase marijuana too, and if they're going to do it, we want to tax it. And it's worth pausing on that. And a lot of the online viewers were talking about the fact that Colorado is bringing in tens of millions of dollars in new tax revenue. Where's that money coming from? That money was going into the hands of cartels and the underground market for decades and decades. Now Colorado's capturing that. A significant amount of that money is going to public schools. A significant amount of that money is going to regulate this industry, and a significant amount of money is going into funding a lot of the substance abuse programs that everyone at this table is supportive of.
Let's go back to the studio audience. Please tell us who you are, where you live, and what is your question?
My name is Jill Gabler. I live in Colorado Springs. My question is, With the opening of the new recreational marijuana shop in Manitou Springs, I can now drive there in about 7 minutes. So I think we can all agree that recreational marijuana is already very available in our community. So knowing that, has there been any conversation or arguments around the idea that it might be best for our community to go ahead and legalize recreational marijuana, if only to allow us as a community to regulate it in a way that best meets our values, especially around labeling and keeping it away from children?
You know, Kari, I want to just follow up with this because it is legal to use recreational marijuana in Colorado Springs. It's just not legal to sell it. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Doesn't Jill raise a excellent point that at least control it here under your own terms here in Colorado Springs, the sale?
Which seems logical. And I think that pro-legalization of marijuana supporters want you to think that it's regulation versus prohibition. And with the idea that regulation will make things safer. But I think that we already know that regulation doesn't make things safer. It's been brought up again and again, and I'll bring it up again. Alcohol, tobacco, when things are legalized, it makes them socially acceptable. When things are socially acceptable, there is more use. When there's more use, there's more abuse. When there's more abuse, there's more illness, heartache, sadness, homelessness, social costs. I mean, I don't really know how many more I can list. So I think the fundamental problem here is that the pro-legalization people think that if we just label it right, or if we just only sell it from 3 to 5, that will solve our problems. And it just, the reality is it just doesn't work that way.
Brian, let me just follow up on that, because here at Fox 21, again, we're not taking sides in this discussion, but if you look at popular culture, we see all sorts of references to the use of marijuana in films and television and so forth, in music. We don't see references to use of heroin and cocaine as often. So has it gained popular acceptance already, and is this just an issue of the toothpaste is already out of the tube, so to speak?
Well, I think so. I mean, marijuana has been used widely in our country for decades and decades. And, you know, Colorado voters have decided, you know, we're going to tax this product and regulate it and do it in a fashion that suits our community. When writing Amendment 64, the legalization law, we specifically put in there a provision that said, you know, local communities can opt out of this. And Colorado Springs so far has made the choice to do so. But it sounds like a lot of citizens here are thinking, you know, we've seen how this worked for the last 6 months in Denver, Manitou Springs, other places around the state. It seems to be working pretty well, and in fact, we want to start regulating this on our terms, and I think that'd be a smart move.
We're back to the audience. Please tell us who you are, where do you live, and what is your question?
My name is Heather Sharp. I'm a family doc in Manitou Springs. And so I just wanted to speak to Mark's repeated assertion that alcohol is safer than marijuana. I think that's, there's limited data on that. The impact of alcohol wears off in 8 hours, whereas in marijuana, it really affects its spatial navigation, new memory formation, and many aspects of cognitive development. And so, and that can last out in good studies out to 2 weeks and certainly 3 months. So for youth using it, it has more of an impact. For people using it on ski areas next to my children, their ability to navigate and not impact my children is hard. I worked at the base of a mountain in at Copper Mountain and saw many people hit by others, by people on alcohol, and that's going to increase when people are smoking and trying to navigate the complex and busy hills here. And two, I'd just like to understand if someone could speak to that people are for it, and Amendment 64 doesn't necessarily mean people are for it. Maybe they're for legalization, but not necessarily in their neighborhood, just as at least 3 communities have voted for 64, but specifically voted it down in their individual communities, Larkspur, Palmer Park, and I believe it was Lakewood. So I don't think that's an implicit statement that if you're pro Amendment 64, you're pro recreational marijuana, especially with the increased information we've been trying to circulate.
You know, Mark, Heather raised an interesting point, because marijuana is still a Scheduled I narcotic according to the Drug Enforcement Agency, and there have been limits on the kinds of studies that have been done. So is it possible that there isn't just enough information out there today to really determine if there are more dangerous risks than perhaps we know going into this?
Yeah, I actually think that's a really great question. And of course, if anybody knows the history of federal prohibition, we haven't really been allowed to do a lot of research in the U.S. Having said that, there is research done. There's also comparisons looking at some of the major risk factors from some of the leading experts, like Dr. Henningfield, on substance abuse, that rates and compares things like dependence, withdrawal, tolerance, as well as intoxicating effects, and cross-compares those to other drugs, like nicotine, like cocaine, like heroin, and alcohol. You'll notice you just get pretty low scores. There's a lot of data out there already that's showing that marijuana, comparative to a lot of other substances, it's never killed anybody from an overdose. It's impossible to do so. It would take a lot of marijuana to kill somebody. We see alcohol deaths happen 88,000, I think, a year just on overdosing on alcohol. And if you look even just this graph I love, has comparative effects of sort of the damage done to the user versus the damage done to the other. And if you guys notice this large bar on the right here, that's alcohol. Okay, so I think they rank it as 72 on this scale, on this index. And over here we have cannabis at 20. So I mean, just looking at what research we do have, I think most Americans in general know that if they run into somebody in an alley, they'd rather them probably be smoking a joint than drinking all night long, and there's a lot less violence, sexual abuse, and other crimes associated with marijuana.
Ken, I don't think you agree with some of those remarks.
I'm not going to disagree with Mark right now, but I will tell in some response to Heather's question, the science is very, very clear. There are significant negative impacts in adolescents because their brain continues to develop. As it relates to Jill's question, Colorado Springs has opted out of recreational sales, but I can tell you marijuana is extremely prevalent in all of our high schools. You ask any SRO in any high school in this town, it's prevalent. Kids are going to the bathroom over their break, they're vaping with their trippy sticks, they're using in record amounts now, and we have not yet opted in to recreational sales. The DSM-5 has a medical criteria for marijuana dependency and marijuana withdrawal. So from a scientific perspective, the science is very clear about the negative effects in adolescent and young adult use. The brain does not fully mature until about 25 years old. So Heather's point is very well taken, that there is a concern that despite it, and I think everybody on the panel would agree that we do not want it in the hands of children, but unfortunately that is happening at record amounts in this day and age.
Well, after this next audience member question, we're going to have to check back in with social media. But sir, please tell us who you are, where do you live, and what is your question?
My name is Bill Murray. I live in Colorado Springs. Part of it is a discussion. I'm listening to what the doctor is talking about. And one of the issues, I call it island mentality, where you're surrounded by people selling marijuana, yet you refuse to accept the consequences of the situations that are directly in front of us. I came from an Alabama community which was a dry and wet county, and I watched the black market going from the wet county to the dry county every year, and I said, well, how come you don't stop it? Because we don't have to, because there's revenue being generated from the wet county. So why are we hiding in the sand? New York Times just did a series of editorials, one of which called for the legalization of marijuana nationwide. And the second article they wrote was congratulating Colorado and how sensible we've been and how we're progressing through the thing, and that we're an example for the rest of the country. Now, the question becomes, in an island mentality, are you ever successful? I mean, if you hide from the truth of the matter, that either you do it through the black market or you do it through a recreational environment, okay, how do you expect to control it? You said it's already prevalent, okay, but you have no mechanisms to control it in this particular environment. Make it recreational, and it'll force the adults to come to grips with the fact that it is prevalent, and we must discuss it with our children, and we must keep it, at least in some sanitary sense, away from the children. Thank you.
And Carr, you have made the point a number of times, it's a legitimate point, that any time you legalize something, it certainly gives some reasonableness to it. It makes it authentic. It makes it genuine. It provides acceptance. But isn't the point made from the gentleman's question a good one, that at least if you regulate it, we can control more of the distribution, the access, potential use?
One would think so, right? I mean, it seems like a good question. It is a good question, and it seems like a logical thing to reason. However, I'd like to point out something about tobacco, which is legal, right? Tobacco is the most widely smuggled legal substance in the world. And there is a thriving black market using tobacco. It's enormously profitable. It's based on violence. Why would criminals smuggle a legal substance? Doesn't make any sense, right? To avoid taxes. So it's a fallacy to think that you're going to regulate it, you're legalizing it, you're going to regulate it, you're going to get rid of the cartel, the black market. That's naive at best. The more a substance is taxed, the higher the price, results in greater efforts to evade paying the taxes, and a greater willingness for criminals to protect their turf using violence. In Colorado, the marijuana black market is thriving. It hasn't gone anywhere. So I have to wonder who's putting their head in the sand.
Brian, let me just follow up with what Kari just said, because the data seems to show, and everything we've seen in the news industry, is that one of the most black marketed products in all of the state of New York are cigarettes. And they're a legal product and they're already regulated. So are there concerns that maybe the regulation and state distribution, or rather state legalization of sales, doesn't really solve that problem?
Well, you know, I got to say, I don't hear about a lot of shootouts by cartels over tobacco profits. It just, perhaps that's out there, but I've literally never heard about that. I think we should look back at alcohol prohibition. You know, that was found to be a massive failure by our country in the 30s. There was a very large and dangerous underground market, people like Al Capone running it. When our country made the sensible step forward and said, we're going to actually legalize alcohol for adults 21 and over, that black market went away. And that is what we are seeing in Colorado. You know, people here are not, alcohol is legal in our state. People are not bootlegging gin and going and buying it, you know, from people's garage. They're not doing that for marijuana anymore, unless they're in smaller and smaller numbers, because people want to go to a regulated marketplace to purchase a product like marijuana. They want to know what's in that product. It's going to say there right on the label. They want to know how it's produced, the same way they do with alcohol. So I really think we're moving towards this regulated market. There may be some bumps in the road, but the gentleman brought up the fact that the New York Times just looked at Colorado after 7 months and said, you know, this is working. The Denver Post has editorialized the same way, and the Brookings Institute, a prominent national institute, just came out and said the same thing. So I think the writing is really on the wall. This is working in Colorado, and I think other states and perhaps even other countries are going to adopt this model soon.
Well, the temperature seems to be rising here in the studio, and it makes sense because the producers tell me our Facebook page is blowing up with comments from our viewers at home. So let's check with our social media anchor. Lauren, what's the latest?
That's right. We're also getting some thoughtful questions, and we're getting some funny ones. And because you guys mentioned the Pop-Tarts, I'll read you Ray's tweet. He says, just because edibles are being labeled like Pop-Tarts, etc., doesn't mean it's targeting children. Adults still love Pop-Tarts. Coming from a Pop-Tart lover. And also, you know, this is something that I've heard a lot around Colorado Springs. Desiree mentions, she says, with 5 military installations and countless military contractors within city limits, there's no way the Springs Council will allow it. There's no way that revenue from the sale of weed will make up from just one installation closing or a contractor moving to another state. It is not worth the risk. And somebody responded to that saying, do you really think that they would pick up and move a military installation because they don't like the local laws? Do you know what that would cost? That was from Destin Blevins. So that is something I know a lot of people would like to hear from our panel. Back to you.
Well, Mark, it's an interesting comment and an interesting question, because we've seen in the news world industries that have actually changed locations from one state to another because they disagree with local or state policies. Are there legitimate concerns that perhaps certain groups or industries may leave Colorado because of the disagreement on question 64?
Yeah, the big concern is certainly around the military. We're a very military proud town. We love our servicemen and women. We have 5 military bases at least surrounding the area. So certainly there's some concern that specifically Fort Carson could relocate the base during the BRAC closures that happened in 2017. And this was used as a catalyst by opponents to institute the ban against the will of voters in the city. Unfortunately, the Pentagon doesn't agree. There's a phone call made by Colorado Springs Business Journal to the Pentagon asking, hey, would this actually impact your decision? And they said, no, we actually operate in a lot of different countries with over 150 military bases around the planet that have different laws than we do, including places like the Netherlands, where marijuana is legal and tolerated. So, and look at Washington. We've got military bases in Washington, and that's not a concern coming up at a local level. So I think even among opponents, it's a very weak argument to say that that's going to be a catalyst for moving the military away. And in all reality, unless we improve our economy here locally, that will be a bigger catalyst to not having the military here. They've already started to relocate troops. I think a few thousand just left the area. And when it's 40% of our economy, we need to ask ourselves, do we need to be that dependent on the federal government to be able to support and bolster our local economy? Or should we be looking at diversifying our investment portfolio by allowing in industries like cannabis, which are bringing in millions of dollars? Over 50% of these sales at retail stores are new tourism dollars coming into the area. We've got beautiful Pikes Peak, Garden of the Gods, great region. And if we looked at this sensibly as a society, we could have a tourism boom here in Colorado Springs, bring back some jobs, and boost our local economy. And even like the one viewer said, you know, put some pot into our potholes and finally get that fixed.
Well, Ken, Mark raises some interesting points, because we've seen across the country states that have suffered because of businesses that have collapsed or left or moved on for a variety of reasons. Is there a concern here that maybe we should broaden the revenue base, because whether we like it or not, every state and local jurisdiction seems to want more revenue?
No, I think he brings up some valid points. To date, the revenues have fallen far short of predictions, number one. And as it relates to the black market, I'm going to go back to that other question. The black market is thriving and well in the state of Colorado. My colleagues at the DEA have told me that part of the reason is that the drug cartels are shifting their focus. The marijuana in Colorado is so strong, you can get so high on it, that they cannot compete. So they are shifting to other things like methamphetamine and heroin, which is also becoming a little more prevalent. The state of Washington will not even sell hash oil. The country of the Netherlands will not sell products more than 15% THC content because they find it may be too addictive. So a lot of the average THC content is around 10 to 12% at this time, but you know, we have competitions in Colorado seeing if you can get 20, 25, 28% THC, and now the new July 10 celebration, which started this year, and we'll hear more about that next year with the hash oil explosion that is occurring, no pun intended.
This is a great opportunity for me to ask my latest snap poll question. I'd like the studio audience here to respond with the sound of applause if you are a current recreational user of marijuana. Please applaud if you are. So a small portion of our audience here. Sir, please step over here. Tell me who you are, where you're from, and what is your question?
Hi, my name is Darby Rahman. I'm a pediatrician here in Colorado Springs of 18 years. We keep talking of children in the abstract, and I just want to put in a little reality for you. My practice admitted a 9-month-old less than 2 months ago who was high. I have colleagues at the NICU here at our largest hospital who says they're seeing more and more children born positive with THC, and moms who are born positive, who are positive, excuse me. How you're comparing everything to alcohol, and we know there's social costs, and I have lots of patients with fetal alcohol syndrome. Help me, speaking to these children that are being born now, when they're 15 and they're with their foster parents, because lots of these kids who have fetal alcohol with foster parents, explain to them, Dr. Rahman, why didn't you stop it when you had a chance? I can't go to college now because my cognitive function is not as great as it was before. You had a chance to stop it. You know alcohol wasn't working. What, as a pediatrician, when I'm in the exam room with that parent, that foster parent, that child, how do I answer that question?
It's a great question. Brian?
Yeah, I think you call the police immediately. It's illegal for people to give minors marijuana, even if it's an accident. And that is a serious criminal offense in our state.
You're talking about babies being born with THC positive.
Okay, so just to answer the question, and babies being boy THC positive, then again, that is a criminal offense in this state, and that should be addressed as such. What it's worth noting is, you know, if we need to put this in context, right? If people use current prescription drugs, which, you know, ostensibly the doctors in here prescribe for people, they can die, right? People often die. In fact, that's the #1 accidental killer in our country is prescription drug overdoses, more than road fatalities. People use alcohol, they can die. People do not die from the use of marijuana, right? So it's inappropriate to give it to minors, inappropriate for pregnant people to use it, unquestionably. But let's have some context here. And while we're focusing resources, you know, Colorado has made the wise decision, in my belief, to stop arresting and jailing adults for using marijuana, right? If they're giving it to kids, yes. That's what the jail cells are for. You know, go after them in that context. But we should use those resources. The police are not out there arresting adults anymore for this. Use that to hunt down these criminals that are selling methamphetamine that we've heard about. They use that to hunt down and make our roads safer. I mean, that is a sensible choice, and I think that's what the Colorado voters wanted.
And I'd love to add to that, just in the context that I don't know that we have the research to know if a 9-month pregnancy on cannabis is going to affect somebody 15 years later to where they can't go to college. And so, I mean, from that perspective, you're a pediatrician, it's in your realm. I totally understand the effects of fetal alcohol syndrome, something we have to deal with. People have substance abuse problems, and that's what it boils down to. If you're willing to use tobacco, alcohol, even marijuana or prescription drugs or illegal drugs for that matter during your pregnancy, and it's not for medical purposes, prescribed by a doctor. I did have a friend that the only way she was able to deliver her baby and not have a miscarriage was if she had cannabis, and that was prescribed by her doctor. I should say recommended because it's still Schedule 1. But the idea there is to just how do we contextualize that and how do we deal with it when it is fetal alcohol syndrome? Do we lock up the parent or do we find them help? Do we find that kid help as they mature and develop, right? And that's what we tend to do because we're a compassionate society.
Why would you add something else bad when you know that's already bad? That was my
Look,
question.
I mean, people have been having babies and smoking marijuana for a very long time. You yourself said you had the research.
No, well, that's the interesting thing is if you look at actual statistics from the CDC, there really has not been an increase in marijuana teen use in Colorado. There just simply has not. Now, that doesn't mean there aren't anecdotal instances, and perhaps certain hospitals have gone from 4 to 14, and that's tragic and unfortunate, but that's a 600% increase, right? And I think we need to contextualize that, think about what that means, and look at the actual national numbers and how they relate to Colorado and the fact that teen use is not on the rise in our state.
All right. Well, let me go ahead. Let me follow up on this, and I want to go to I want to bring Kari back into this discussion here. And again, here at Fox 21, we're not taking sides in this issue. However, there was a recent study written by 5 economists titled "Trends in Fatal Motor Vehicle Crashes Before and After Marijuana Commercialization in Colorado," and this addresses not recreational marijuana use, but medicinal. According to the study, drivers involved in fatal crashes in the years 2009 to 2011, that 10% of Colorado's involved in fatal crashes tested positive for THC. The rest of the U.S. is 4.1%. And I want to make certain our viewers know this is not exactly in context, so we're not trying to mislead anyone here, but it is a data point. It might suggest that medicinal marijuana use may have contributed to more fatal crashes. May have, and I want to emphasize that. So, Kari, does that make sense that maybe marijuana might lead to additional deaths in a form like this?
Short answer, yes. So I'd like to respond to what Mark and Brian said. First, there is data showing that use among young people ages 12 and up, yes, has increased since medicinal marijuana was legalized, and also since recreational. So I'm not sure what study.
Can you cite that, please?
Yeah.
Yeah, I can cite that actually. National Survey on Drug Use, years 2006 to 2011. Colorado's medical marijuana, are regulations working from the Rocky Mountain High Intensity Drug Trafficking, 2012. Those are just a couple of the things. So it is going up.
That's a law enforcement group. That's not like a public health group, the Rocky Mountain High Intensity Drug Enforcement Association.
I have CDC statistics saying during the same year it dropped 2.8% in Colorado, and that's the Center for Disease Control at the federal level, not necessarily the DEA and their associated law enforcement agencies.
So the national average for use of youth 12 to 17 is 7.64. The Colorado average is 10.72. The national average for 12th grade ever tried is 22.6%. Our state average is 31.2. The national average for 12th grade daily use is 6.6%, Colorado 7.8. So I'm not a numbers person. If someone were reading these numbers to me, I wouldn't remember. Let me just tell you this, we're way above the national average on all of those stats. The second thing I'd like to point out is Brian mentioned a couple times people being arrested and beaten and thrown in prison for use or possession of marijuana. And that simply is not true. The truth is that less than 1% of all state and federal prisoners is in for marijuana possession alone. And in many of those cases, the possession conviction is actually the result of a plea bargain dismissing some more serious charges. So that's really, it's a myth, and it's something that the marijuana industry likes to throw out and make you feel good because, you know, you're getting lots of people out of prison, but it's simply not true. The third thing I'd like to point out in the context of this discussion is that I find it a little alarming that we're using alcohol and narcotics and other drugs as our benchmark. So we're saying, well, we have all these really bad things that, you know, we're living with, we're dealing with, let's just throw something else in the mix. I just, as a person who lives in this earth, I can't accept that.
Mark?
I'd say that you're going to have statistics all over the place, and that when you're looking at this thing, we have to be realistic about the sources. Daniel Reese over at the University of Denver did a study on the economics of marijuana legalization, and believe it or not, we're not doubling down, we're substituting for more dangerous substances like alcohol. In economic terms, a substitute is an alternative for people, so they generally drink less. I've heard this from bartenders in town as well, anecdotally. But he found that a 5% decrease in beer sales actually resulted in a 12% decrease in fatal car accidents. We've also seen a decrease in suicides from less psychotropic medications being taken and alcohol, which is a depressant. So you actually have a substitutive effect that you could argue on the counter side is actually better for public health. And we have data to support that as well.
You're talking about statistics and you're citing a bartender?
No, I cited Daniel Reese, the professor of economics at the Denver University.
Oh, okay.
That was the first part of that, Kari. Stay with me. Stay with me.
Oh, okay. Gotcha. I'm with you.
Also, again, public health officials, Center for Disease Control would say otherwise. There's also another study that's looked at 20 years worth of data from states with and without medical marijuana laws that found in the Journal of Adolescent Health in April 2014, fairly new, that according to that new study, there was no significant data showing that it led to an increase among use in adolescents. So while we may have anecdotes, while we may have increased enforcement bringing this into context, or perhaps increased cases in our individual practices, where we're all coming from is really recognizing that this is now here to stay. And I feel like we're back in 2012 debating whether or not it should be legalized. That's not the question here. It is legal. 20 and up adults can grow.
That's true, but the Amendment 64, your law that you wrote, also allows us to vote as localities and
we can also brew beer and wine at home, right? Like we're allowed to do that in Colorado.
And we can cook lasagna. I mean, what does that have to do with anything?
But you can go to a restaurant for lasagna and get it commercially cooked. It has a lot to do with everything because we're talking about simple supply and demand here, which hasn't gone away on marijuana in thousands of years. Literally been bought and sold ever since you were a kid and probably your parents were a kid. The point is you're going to have X demand. You're going to have X supply. You're suggesting that by banning retail sales, the black market you admit already exists, leaving it in the hands of them, a $150 million marketplace in Colorado Springs, leaving it in the hands of gangs and cartels who are getting kids into high schools with marijuana, versus accessing the supply source through a safe, regulated tax model that can derive some social benefit to offset the social costs.
All right, and we're going to leave it there as a last comment on that particular question. And I just want to make certain that our viewers at home know. I cited a study with some statistics, as did Kari. We're not aware of any data that shows that those elevated numbers here in Colorado are specifically tied to medicinal marijuana use or recreational marijuana use. It could be, and it could also be coincidental, so I don't want our viewers to be left with any mistaken impressions. I don't think the data is completely in to tie it definitively to one or the other. Let's go back to the studio audience, sir. Please tell us who you are, where do you live, and what is your question?
Yes, my name is Jim Turbush. I'm from Manitou Springs, and I'm also a public health doctor. And I can tell you with great certainty that marijuana is not good for public health. The El Paso County Board of Health passed a resolution not too long ago that had 59 scientific references. Many of these were in peer-reviewed scientific journals. To follow on to Dr. Heather Sharp's question earlier, I would ask Dr. Flynn to kind of tease out for us what we know scientifically about the effect of cannabis on the developing brain.
Ken?
Yeah, the science is very clear. In the prenatal brain, marijuana use by the mother has significant negative sequela on the fetal brain, fetal growth, and fetal development. The studies have shown longitudinally that even in the latest study I read was offspring of users of marijuana might have sequela related to drug use in the future or behavioral abnormalities similar to fetal alcohol syndrome. I mean, I don't think I need to cite one reference. There are dozens and dozens of references in the pediatric arena regarding the negative effects of cannabis on the fetal brain, the child's brain, and the adolescent brain. That is a period of rapid brain growth. Neurons are trying to find connections, and the components of THC interfere with those appropriate connections. And the other longitudinal studies, which are large, I mean, you're talking numbers of 6,000 kids they follow over many, many years. The earlier they begin onset of use, the less likely they are to have accomplished a high school or college education. There was an article in JAMA that came out several months ago about the drop in IQ with heavy users, so of 8 to 10 points. So there's a vast amount of evidence on the negative effects of cannabis use on the human brain. There are areas of the human brain that actually become smaller, particularly the hippocampus, which is an area that governs memory. I think that if there were other parts of the body that became smaller, we may have less users around.
So, Brian, so if there are legitimate questions, why not permit the legal sale of recreational marijuana in Colorado Springs and let this play out so there's more data that comes in, and then perhaps a more informed decision be made at some time in the future?
If I understand your question, I support the recreational sale of marijuana in Colorado Springs. I think it would be a sensible thing for the city to do. I absolutely believe that more research is needed on marijuana. Now, there is a tremendous amount of research out there. And I would certainly note, I think the question, that was a pretty bold statement that marijuana is bad for public health, that the gentleman just said. And I would just raise the mere fact that there are actually 23 states that have medical marijuana laws on their books. Colorado's had a medical marijuana law since the year 2000. I personally have worked with dozens and dozens of cancer patients, AIDS patients that would take real alarm in the fact that he's just dismissing what they have found to be a valuable medicine. And I think more and more states, Sanjay Gupta, other sort of prominent physicians are coming out and saying, in fact, this does provide value for some people.
I'm going to add to that. Terminal illness is a completely different ballgame than just trying to unwind after a stressful day at work. So I don't think you can lump patients with terminal disease.
Stress kills a lot of people, doctor.
Into people that just want to use for medicinal purposes. That is not. I don't think that's fair to those patients.
I think we're one of the most overworked countries in the world. We work extremely hard. We're under very stressful conditions as Americans. To say that it's okay for somebody to have a glass of wine after work and call that healthy, but then say it's bad for public health to alleviate your stress using cannabis, which doesn't leave you hungover the next day, which, by the way, contributes to 72% of that waste, is being hungover at work and being non-productive in the American economy. We start talking about policy here, not hide behind children.
All right, let's go back to the audience for another question, and after that, we'll have to check with social media again. Please tell us who you are, where do you live, and what is your question?
My name is Ingrid Henderson. I live here in Colorado Springs. And first and foremost, I'd like to say I feel that most of the people, every person that I know that supports marijuana, medical, or recreational, cares about children, and I feel we're all responsible adults, and we've been able to make decisions regarding alcohol and our government that have served us, and that we can move forward making decisions regarding marijuana as well. Now, to speak on the result that marijuana affects brain cells, I would like to inform you that I have been a medical patient since 2009, and I just graduated at the top of my class, Student of the Year, magna cum laude, in honors with high distinction. So I would like to open your mind that marijuana, that might not be true, and there might be other factors. There might be alcohol and other data that is not correct in that usage. Furthermore, I'd like to change the conversation into the economy and the benefits of marijuana, since that seems to have been overlooked in this conversation. So let's talk about tax revenues. Over $17 million from medical marijuana and retail marijuana in the first 4 months of 2014 alone. Now, I did just mention that I just graduated. I was going to go back to being a waitress because there's not very many options for the market out there. Because of marijuana, I'm the strategic organizational engineer for the Marijuana Business Academy. I have a high-end level position. So my question to you who oppose legalizing marijuana, what about all those people that don't have jobs, that have no hope for their life, that are stuck in the same job and they're unhappy? What do you offer? What do you offer the city when my car goes over potholes and I bust my rim and I have to pay $300 as a single mom working? Are you going to fix the potholes? Where are you going to get the money? Because we're going to watch Denver, and I can personally tell you by going to investment concerts, conferences, and watching people with millions of dollars come from all over the United States to Denver, that on a Monday night, every single hotel, Motel 6, is full. You cannot find a hotel room. And they're selling those hotel rooms for $130 a night. And we're missing out on that money. So what are you going to tell the citizens when the schools close, when the potholes, when our street lights on, and our kids don't have what they need? What are you going to do for us?
You know, Ingrid, I just got the impression I might be working for you one day. You seem like you're going to be in charge of something, and we'll all be working for you. But thank you for the question. So, Kari, doesn't she raise some legitimate issues in terms of, you know, we've talked about the revenue a number of times, but aren't there legitimate concerns about the revenue and the opportunities that it might generate?
Well, first, Ingrid, congratulations. Graduating top of your class, that's amazing. And I think actually the more amazing feat is being a single mom. I don't know how you do it. I think that is the most difficult job in the world. So congratulations on that. And you raise great points. I mean, people needing jobs is a good thing. But I guess what I would say is that I don't think that marijuana is going to be our saving grace. Yes, it'll bring some money in, definitely. It could fix potholes, it could water our park lawns, those sorts of things. Those are all very good things. But the question I would ask is at what cost? And we've already talked before about, we know that for the tax money brought in for alcohol and tobacco, for every dollar that's brought in, it's estimated that we then turn around and spend, I've heard between 10 and 15. I've read those statistics both. So we'll turn around and spend 15. So it's fuzzy math to me. That doesn't make sense. And the other point I'd like to make is that there are these unintended consequences of this law. The author here himself said he didn't foresee some things like the edibles. He didn't foresee those things happening. Things that are happening that I've read in the newspaper recently is the increase in homelessness. Folks coming from other places to be in Pueblo and Denver, partly because they want access to use marijuana, partly because they're looking for jobs in that field, but we're not able to accommodate all of that. So that's a social cost that we're having to pay. So that's my answer. And no, I can't provide a job. That's not my role in this to do that. But that would be my explanation to someone who's saying, what about all this good money that could come into our state for these people? Is I would say, what about the cost that it's going to cost us?
Before I bring Mark back in the conversation, Kari, I'd like to ask you to stop reading the newspaper and watch the Fox 21 News at 9. That's where you get all the information. Mark, I want to bring you back into the conversation.
Sure. It's been a huge topic in Colorado Springs. We're one of the only 2 cities in the entire state of Colorado that has not recovered from the Great Recession since 2008. We're actually looking at higher than average national employment in the city, and we've only created, I believe, 13 jobs since January. Net jobs. We lost a big call center. We're kind of like the New Delhi of call centers in Colorado or in the United States. We lost about 400 jobs when one of those closed, and so the net job creation we've had is dismal. In fact, we're losing a lot of our young professionals like myself. I've seen a lot of friends go away. don't want to live in this city because we simply don't have economic opportunity for them. And what I'm seeing with cannabis is that in the medical industry alone in this city, being the second largest city in the state, being the second largest industry in the state in terms of supply and demand, we have created 1,000 jobs. And it's easily anticipable, it can be easily anticipated that we can double that. We can create another 1,000 jobs in Colorado Springs, given the opportunity to follow the wisdom of the voters and to allow retail marijuana. It's here to stay now. It's not a question of if it should be legal. It's a question of should we tax and regulate it and allow adults a safe product in safe access through a safe business that's beholden to a license. And in terms of answering your question, we actually do have some numbers around actual costs, which is fascinating, especially comparative to alcohol and tobacco. And this was done by the senior policy analyst at the Center for Addictions Research in British Columbia in Canada, who actually looked at two main costs, which were health costs, in terms of number of ER visits and addiction rates, etc., and the enforcement costs of policing a certain substance. So while alcohol and tobacco understandably had very few enforcement costs, I think alcohol was $153.43 or in Canadian dollars for every user, cannabis had $328 spent on every user to enforce it by the law. That's arresting people, giving them citations, tickets, putting something on their record, which does affect job employment and the ability to be a productive member in society. While the health costs were significantly less. Tobacco was the highest, you're right about that, Dr. Finn, at $822. Alcohol was right after that, $165. Marijuana was $20. It's night and day here in terms of the actual health costs we're dealing with, comparative to Canadian studies which have been done. And they've had legal marijuana in British Columbia for quite some time in medical form and otherwise. So we can look at other policy analysts, other health research firms, and kind of determine some of these answers in real economic terms. And when you're talking about 3 times the tax revenue in marijuana this year than alcohol, even though we have less users, I think we'll have plenty left over to treat any social ills.
Now, we've got less than 20 minutes left in our program tonight. I'm going to ask all of our audience members and our panelists to join me in the lightning round because we're going to keep our questions a little shorter and our answers shorter so we get to as many people as possible. But right now, let's find out if there's bigger disagreement here in the Fox 21 News Studio or is it on the social media pages of Twitter and Facebook. So let's check with Lauren. What's the latest?
Thanks, Mark. A lot of people are just talking about the sheer prevalence of it for young people, especially. Ray's chiming in again. He says pot has always been in high schools. Mine, even hearing my mother tell me stories when she was in high school. Also heard from Michael Varga. He says, when I came to America, I was overwhelmed by the amount of pot in college. It's everywhere, regardless of legality, and he's from Eastern Europe. Also, Matthew Hammonds, he says tobacco and alcohol get into the hands of kids. We try to prevent it, but it still happens. I think personally the marijuana industry is safer than any big tobacco company or alcohol company. So that's what folks are saying on Twitter and Facebook at the moment. Mark, back to you.
Thanks, Lauren. So, well, Brian, because this is so regulated compared to some other products such as alcohol and tobacco and so forth, is it possible that we can do a better job than we have with other products, and then in the end result it might be safer for those users and the youth around those users than we've seen with alcohol and tobacco?
Well, I think there's a real opportunity here. I mean, Colorado has decided to regulate this product, to take it out of the black market, to actually label it, to have all the production under camera. And I think that does really open up an opportunity. We know that many people in our country use marijuana. Our former president, our current president has admitted to using it. Half of our Supreme Court. So there are a lot of people using this substance, and moving forward, we know that there's about 100 million Americans that have tried this. So I think it's important that those individuals know what they're consuming, that they're able to look at that product, know it was made in an ethical fashion, know that it's labeled so they understand the potency and perhaps what else is in there. And I think Colorado has really taken a very strict look at regulating this. There are hundreds and hundreds of pages of state law and code that regulate everything about this industry, from the font on the package of the marijuana brownie to the megapixel of the camera at the grow facility. It is all completely regulated, and I think that's the future of this.
You know, one of the things I learned, Ken, and this is to follow up with what Brian was just talking about, was when I visited a dispensary in Denver yesterday. It was a dispensary in which they grew their own marijuana, and I was actually surprised to find out that all the plants are accounted for with RFID chips and so forth. So it certainly led the impression that it is a highly regulated industry, and that those who are engaged in the actual legalization of growing and selling are kind of minding their P's and Q's and perhaps doing a better job of managing it than we've seen with other products. Does Brian raise legitimate issues about the control and regulation of marijuana?
Of course he does. I don't know what the average age of the people on the Supreme Court are, but I can tell you the marijuana today is not the marijuana they used 20 years ago. It is much, much more potent. You know, we talk about data, we talk about statistics, we talk about data points, but I would ask anybody in the audience to be the parents of Levi Tamba, who ate a medical marijuana product, who was a foreign exchange student from Africa, was going to school in Wyoming, came to Colorado to try marijuana, was able to obtain a medical product even though he was underage, became psychotic, and fell to his death off of a balcony. I wouldn't want to be his parent. The other issue regarding marijuana and its potency along those lines is that, again, I can't stress, it's not the marijuana of today. Of yesterday. I mean, the average THC content is very, very high. And now when you're getting into the butane hash oil products, you know, the new July 10 holiday is going to become, that's the crack of marijuana. So, I mean, I think Brian does raise some valid questions and concerns, but I think we have to be very careful when looking at this product, because it's not the same pot that we used to know.
Yes, if I may, just on regulations and potency, two pretty big points of view from the opponent's side. I would just suggest that we are taking actions in the laws to look at equivalency standards. So when you start talking about potency, I could talk about how whiskey is 40 times stronger than beer. It is. Nobody's denying that. Now, there's safe consumption levels for that sort of potency, just as you would prescribe a Vicodin of certain milligrams to be taken only in a certain dosage. So I think we are moving towards that. Now, granted, we have a non-toxic substance you can't overdose on, similar to, I guess, dissimilar to alcohol. But in terms of really determining that, there's kind of a cap. You can only get 100%. Everything else underneath that is some level of that potency. So in terms of what the market wants and what's being provided by the industry, is really looking at regulating that and creating an equivalency standard. With proper labeling, I think it's important. You mentioned hash oil explosions. Those are happening in homes in an unregulated market. The regulated market has companies like mine putting together standard operating procedures this thick. What they have to deal with in terms of producing butane hash oil is extremely, extremely stringent. They have to go through professional engineers. They have to have people come through and sign off on their equipment stating that it meets standards for engineering and that it's not going to blow up. It has to be in its own room. It has to have fire suppression. It has to have detection of gas levels. So there's a lot of investment that goes into producing this safely. Just as if you wanted to enjoy a glass of scotch, you would probably buy it from the liquor store rather than try to distill it in your home. That might be a little dangerous.
And I'm going to just respond to that real quickly.
Please.
And I commend Mark for doing what he's doing. However, I did also visit a marijuana dispensary in Denver, and the product that I left with was the most flimsy, non-child resistant package I've ever seen that any one-year-old could open. So I think there are a lot of holes currently in this regulated market, and I would invite everybody in the audience to read the Denver and County Auditor, the City and County of Denver Auditor's report on the medical marijuana system last August of 2013, which basically demonstrated that the medical marijuana system is completely broken in Denver. So we have a lot of things that need fixing.
And I want to remind everyone we're still in our lightning round, so we'll have shorter questions and shorter answers. So let's go to this gentleman. Please tell us who you are, where do you live, and what is your question?
My name is Chris Kilroy. I live in Manitou Springs. I'm here as a private citizen. A couple things I just wanted to a couple things I want to clear up is that back to the suicide thing. This is a public health issue, and a little bit of an aside. El Paso County has one of the highest suicide rates in the country, which is extraordinary. And you had mentioned that the increased use of marijuana decreases the use of psychotropic drugs. What we're really talking about is SSRIs, which are traditional antidepressants. All the research would say is when the prescriptions for SSRIs go down, we see a significant increase in suicide. So that argument's very dangerous because right now, as a county, we're really struggling with the issue of suicide. So we have to be careful what we put out there around that particular issue. I've been working with kids in this town for 16 years. I had the opportunity to talk to two 17-year-old drug dealers who I gave permission to share with me without any possibility of repercussion. And they said that almost 100% of the drug dealers they know are getting all of their weed from medical marijuana shops. They get their card very easily. They collect the money after school. They go and purchase it, and that's their supply. So the black market is alive and well. That being said, my question is this. Alcohol and tobacco have been socially normed into our society for 250 years. If alcohol were introduced today as a new product, it would never be allowed. If tobacco were introduced as a product today, it would never be allowed. Tobacco is killing hundreds of thousands of people a year in the United States. 70% of the prisoners in the state of Colorado were under the influence of alcohol when they committed their crimes. We have 10 million active alcoholics in the United States.
And your lightning round question is?
I'm getting it, okay. I'm still having a hard time because the paradigm you're using is tobacco and alcohol and the devastation it's caused. I'm having a hard time drawing the conclusion that introducing and legalizing weed is logical based on those first two substances that have been introduced and devastated millions of people in this country.
Well, Brian, you authored the referendum question, so let's put it to you.
Sure. Well, you know, marijuana is not being reintroduced or introduced to Colorado. It has been used here for hundreds of years, and it's been used across the world for about 10,000 years. So it's a question of, do we want to keep it you know, being run by cartels in the black market, or do we want to go ahead and regulate this product? And what we do know is marijuana is just unquestionably a safer substance for the user and society than alcohol. The voters here widely endorse this measure. It's being regulated in a very sensible fashion, and I think it's going to continue to be so.
Ken, would you like to respond?
Yeah, of course. I think it's very early. I would agree with Mark and Brian that it's early in the whole process. I mean, despite marijuana being legalized January of this year, it has been commercialized since 2009. To be honest with you, I'm very comfortable with my position because right now I feel the biggest enemy of legalization is legalization. The data will continue to come in and demonstrate negative sequelae related to marijuana use, either via medicinal or recreational.
Let's go back to the studio audience for lightning round questions and answers. Please tell us who you are, where do you live, and what is your question?
My name is Blaze, and I've lived in Colorado for about a year now, and I am wanting to reference the idea of self-medication with recreational cannabis. We knew, or we thought before, that schizophrenics and people with bipolar disorder went to cannabis as a drug, and then we found out later it's something that has actually helped them in a medical sense, and they're actually naturally self-medicating themselves. I know of a couple women myself who had miscarriages, and then they started smoking cannabis, and then they had children. Because of prohibition, we cannot do the type of research necessary so far. So I guess my question is, can we completely rule out people self-medicating that can't necessarily get the red card because they don't have a specific ailment yet?
Yeah, I'm going to break that into a two-part question because I want to bring Kari back into the conversation. And before I get any answer to this man's specific question, Kari, let's shift gears a little bit. Isn't it about time that the DEA certainly allows more studies so that more questions are answered, whether it's good or bad? Shouldn't we have the federal government take a larger role in studying the effects of marijuana?
Absolutely. I have no argument with that whatsoever. I don't know that it's up to the DEA. I think it might be up to the FDA, but I'm not an expert in that by any means. So, yes. Short answer, lightning round, yes.
Let me follow up then with Mark on the terms of medication, the self-medicating with marijuana. And again, short answers here so we can get the last couple questions in.
Sure. Well, I mean, I definitely come from having worked in dispensaries and dealing with patients of all sorts. And one of the biggest impacts that we see in terms of self-medicating outside of the approved list of conditions really falls in line with PTSD in our veterans. I've seen veterans that that were tunnel rats from Vietnam who smoke their cannabis, want to go peacefully to the woods and not be around anybody. I don't see anything wrong with that. From my personal standpoint, people should have the freedom to decide what they put in their bodies, and the government shouldn't have a role in that. So in terms of a safe product like cannabis, I have no problem with my position to say that 90% of America agrees that marijuana has medicinal use, that the research has never been allowed, and even though you're on the Department of Health for El Paso County, it really is the FDA, NIDA, and the DEA, just for your information, that are blocking research from happening and continuing to say that Schedule I marijuana has no accepted medical use, even under the supervision of a doctor.
Can I respond to that?
And we've just about run out of time, so we've come to our last question of the evening. So please tell us who you are, where do you live, and what is your question?
My name is Tammy Harold, and I'm a resident of Colorado Springs. My question is, we have seen an increase in our high schools of students using marijuana, and Amendment 64 was promoted as being able to give money to the schools, and that part of the revenue was going to go to education. So I'm just wondering when education is going to start seeing that big influx of revenue so we can start doing what we need to do in the education field to help our students understand that it's 21 and older and what the effects are on their brains when they're young.
And I've only got about a minute left, so Brian, if you can give sort of a 30-second response to when will the state and the local jurisdiction start seeing the money?
Sure. So what happened with Amendment 64 is the voters specifically earmarked $40 million every year for public school construction. Right? So it's not a blank check for schools. It's not necessarily one community that gets it versus the other. It's a fund that is in fact already doling out significant amounts of money to certain school construction projects around the state.
And Kari, I'm going to leave you with the last word, but again, the specific question is, what about the money, the revenue that comes in at the state and local level? 30 seconds on when do we expect to see that, and certainly what value can we get out of that?
So I'm going to not answer that question, and sorry, and go back to something Brian said a couple things about marijuana being made or grown ethically, and it's unquestionably safe. And I've been doing a little research, read a few things, and it's actually not, it's becoming an industry. So I think people have in their minds sort of the mom and pop, you're growing it in your backyard, in your greenhouse, but since it's becoming an industry. For example, outdoor grows in California consume roughly 60 million gallons of water per day during the growing season, and that's 50% more than is used by all the residents of San Francisco. Indoor grows nationwide use enough electricity to power 1.7 million homes, which is about equal to the output of 7 large power plants. Pesticides are starting to become more and more used because now that it's become this industry, farmers obviously, they want to get anything off of their crops so that they can have more. And I'm probably running out of time, but to me, it's not what it's being sold to us, is not what the reality is.
And we're going to have to leave it there as the final word. Now, this has been a night of spirited and passionate debate and a lot of disagreement. Fox 21 and its sister stations, the Sinclair Broadcast Group, have produced nearly 70 town halls all across the country on a variety of topics that have included passionate audience involvement. And I want to emphasize, it's your involvement. You are the ones who make this a success. You're important to this process because we want to hear from you. We certainly appreciate everything that you put into this tonight. We appreciate all the comments from our live audience here, as well as our members of the audience joining us on social media, both Twitter and Facebook. On behalf of the Fox 21 News, I'd like to thank you for joining us. I'd like to thank the panel for their involvement. We certainly appreciate everything that's happened this evening. Certainly on behalf of the crew, they've done a fantastic job. And as always, we salute our military, law enforcement, firefighters, EMTs, and other emergency personnel for everything they do. I'm Mark Hyman. Good night.
Have
have you seen the clinicaltrials.gov?
I'd love to see the one you were talking about.